Welcome to the Tech in Shanghai podcast, the Pearl of the Orient. Shanghai is the city of the future. All systems go, full steam ahead. It never stops. Technology, innovation, ambition. It's everywhere. Join us as we explore this new world and talk to the people making it happen. The Tech in Shanghai podcast. The future is now.
All right, everybody, welcome back. This is the Tech in Shanghai podcast, the podcast dedicated to the people of the Shanghai startup scene. Today we have one very special guest and one returning guest / co-host. We've got Tony Gu of Drink Entrepreneurs. Tony was on a few weeks ago talking to us about the startup community here and the startup scene. So, Tony, thanks for coming back and helping me co-host this show. And in fact, you are the one that arranged our guest today, so why don't you do the intro and let everybody know about our special guest.
Hey everyone, thanks for having me, John. Today we have guest Bob. Bob is a good friend of mine. We know each other for years. When I was heavily involved TechEdu, we have weekly meeting in his places. He actually, I think he single-handed to start, co-working space kind of movement in Shanghai. I still remember the first one in Huashanlu. That's the first one. And now it's like you're working, your fourth or fifth co-working spaces.
Yes.
So why don't you give us a little introduction about, what you have done and, how's the process now, right?
Okay, yeah. Thanks, Tony. Thanks, John, for inviting. Hi, everyone. My name is Bob, and I'm the CEO co-founder for People Squared. So People Squared is a co-working space in, before we were saying in Shanghai, but now we would say now we're in China. We just opened our fifth co-working space in Shanghai, in the heart of Jing'an, and also we opened our first Beijing office. Not too many people know, but also in the city center location of Beijing. So now we are in two cities. Very excited.
Nice.
Yeah.
So, Bob, before we get going on all this, I think everyone's interested in knowing, because my first introduction to you was at the China Accelerator Demo Day.
Yes.
Which is actually where I bumped into Tony again after a long time. And you were asked to come up on stage and give a little rundown because China Accelerator is based out of one of your spaces, right?
Yes, in Lighthouse.
Right. So, and you gave a bit of history, and I found it fascinating. And correct me if I'm wrong. You started in 2010.
Yes.
And now you just mentioned you're opening your fifth co-working space.
Yeah.
So, on the show a lot, we talk with people about the scene here. How it's growing, how it's developing, how conducive it is to startups and things of that nature. You have a very unique position to provide insight into this because you are part of the infrastructure that allows the startups to actually exist here, and certainly a big part of the support. So before we get into all the different details about that kind of stuff, can you tell us how and why you got involved in this business, what you saw and why you were so interested by it?
Of course. We always tell people the story that for People Squared, it's a little bit by accident. We didn't intentionally try to start a co-working space. Our first space in Huashanlu, that was actually my old office. When I finished my first startup, when I was doing language education, and we were very lucky to sort out our product. And
you mean you sold the company?
Yes, yeah. And after that, we just have an empty, nicely renovated office. And I had my break, and we were trying to see what we can do just with this little space over there. And one of my friends introduced our first team, Uptake. That was a company acquired by Groupon in 2011, but before they were actually based in our office. Okay. So those folks comes in, and we just started sharing our office just to cover our rent.
Right.
And later on, we have a few friends coming in, joining us, and pretty soon we have five team just located in our Huashanlu. It was very crowded.
Right.
Sometimes I just couldn't even believe that so many people were crowded in one place where someone were taking meetings, others are receiving their guests in just the same room. It was very nice, and we learned a lot from the teams. So, and pretty soon, some of the team they start to grow, and we would be so regret to see if we lose some of the teams. So we decided, okay, why don't we try something and bring this idea forward, and that's how we started this as a business.
So basically, you pivot your business, right?
Yes, yeah.
It's nice.
But it's interesting because it wasn't so much intentional, right? You were just you found yourself in a situation where you had the available space, and because for financial reasons, you were like, well, it doesn't make sense for this to sit here empty.
That's right.
And basically, what you discovered, I guess, through doing that is that the market was a lot more vibrant than you had expected, right?
Yeah.
So that was the first space, and a number of different companies came in. At what point did you decide, holy shit, there's probably a decent business here, and there's certainly demand in the market. This is what I want to do.
Yeah. So basically, ever since our second space, because it's much bigger than the first one, we have a need to fill the space because we are paying rent for that, of course, right? But before, it's almost like teams coming in, and they just name the price. We didn't really matter as long as we can cover our rent, right? But since we got a bigger space and we're trying to go a bit commercial on that, so we have to come up with a pricing with some rules, right? And that's when we think, okay, maybe it's something we should do. And then we get ideas that, okay, in US, this is very popular at co-working space, right? We first try to call it a coffee with office, but my personal, I'm not a big coffee drinker. I can't tell the difference between Starbucks and Tim Hortons or anything, right?
Right.
So
Tim Hortons showing your roots there. I like it. Most people won't get that reference.
There we go. So that's why we said, okay, let's do this. And when our second space gets really full, and we said, okay, maybe there's a good demand in that, and we see a lot of teams, they are so good, and we will be so meaningful, right? Just to stay with those teams and learn a lot from them. And also for myself, because of my background, we have friends with investors, and it kind of makes sense for us to not only provide space as a service, but also bring our network to the folks inside the space.
Right. Yeah. And how long did it take you, as this, what's the timeline here between, you mentioned the second space, and you mentioned that it filled up rather quickly. Yeah. What kind of time frame are we looking at here?
Okay. I couldn't really remember for the second space, but we started the second space in 2012. As you see, there's like a 2-year, almost less than 2-year gap in there between our first and second. Then for the second one, we started the third one in 2013, September. So it's about a year, but we were constantly looking for a good space that can fit our need. And for Lighthouse, which is our third space, we started the space in September. And in the middle of October, all the space is gone. And we actually find out it's much easier for our third space compared to the first one and second one, because now people start to understand the concept of doing co-working. We don't have to expand that much, and people come in and they know, okay, they will have a shared space with others where they have shared utilities. Before we have to explain a lot, people come in and say, okay, although I know your space is shared, could we get some kind of separator in between so that we can get a privacy or something, right? But now it just works so well.
And the tenants that are coming to you, I presume a lot of them are foreigners, right?
Are local, actually.
Really?
Yeah. So we have about 70% of the local teams.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and 30%.
Because I was gonna ask. Obviously, I mean, it applies to locals as well, but more so to foreigners. Where if they come here and they want to get involved in a startup of some kind, obviously there's a lot of considerations that are just kind of a pain in the ass, like, you know, your visas and your rents and your this and your that and contracts and all that stuff. Is one of the benefits of working in a co-working space, excuse me, aside from having all that atmosphere of innovation and work and energy, is part of the benefit that you guys streamline and take care of a lot of the nitty-gritty, annoying setup stuff, and they can just move themselves in and start working?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The idea is for the teams, when they come over, they can do a plug-in and play, right? And imagine you try to start a company. You probably want to focus a lot on the product, but what's pushing you away is all those tedious, like, unnecessary work.
Right.
But I say quotation unnecessary, right? But you have to do them. Like, it almost kills you like a enthusiastic, right? After just 1 month of company registration, like everything, we try to bring that over, bring helps to the teams. But we very soon realized we can't do everything, right? Never for any incubators they can do anything, as we are not even an incubator.
Right.
So what we find will be very useful is because we have so many teams that are doing different stuff in our space, and now we are getting more and more teams. So now we have a team inside our space that covers all the human HR resource recruiting for teams. We have a law firm located in our space that are providing law issues, right? And so now we can cover teams like social insurance for their employee, law, HR, right?
Which makes your value proposition all the more compelling, because if you're a team that's in that space and you're like, well, what the hell do I do with legal? What the hell do I do with that? You just go next door and speak with someone, and they can really put you on the right track.
And imagine what happened to those teams that are providing the works, because they're a startup team, right? And sometimes their product is not perfect. They need to find their first batch of users who can provide constant feedbacks to say, okay, I think this product can be better.
Right.
Never better than a user that's sitting beside you and tell you, okay, what I want, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Now, how do you get inspiration or ideas from the various co-working spaces in the U.S. and Europe and other parts of the world? Do you look at what they do and you say, oh, yeah, I'd like to integrate that, or I'd like to try that? Like, how much do you look at other models and integrate them into yours?
It's a very, very interesting question. My typical way of doing things is I want to figure out things from myself and then look back to compare what we're doing with other maybe European or U.S. Space. Or sometimes we just get feedbacks from teams that are moving from U.S., right? So they comes in and said, okay, I feel this space just like the ones in U.S. And then instantly we know we're doing some things that are right.
Right.
We realize we're providing a lot of services to the local startup teams. It would be unwise just to blindly copy whatever people are doing in U.S.
Sure.
The pricing model, like the fulfill the needs for the teams, right? It will be all different.
Right.
Yeah. So we pretty much just thinking, observe from the teams and get our conclusion on what we should provide.
It seems to me that I think you guys sort of create a micro ecosystem for startups, right? So that's, as John said, it's more value added for startup, because if it's not their core business, they can outsource to you guys.
That's right.
So yeah, I think it's great.
What's jumping ahead a bit, but what's really interesting in your current situation is that, again, we had the guys from China Accelerator on a few weeks ago, and obviously they're a big tenant for you guys, probably taking up 30%.
Yeah, 1/3 of the lighthouse.
Right. So, but because, like you said earlier, you're not an incubator or an accelerator, though you are adding different services that make the transition and that period of a startup's life easier. But it must be interesting and beneficial for you and for the other tenants to have an accelerator program in the co-working space, because the Accelerator program does attempt to do those extra things for the different companies involved. And if you're in the same space or within the same organization, whether it's at a different space at one of People Squared's locations in Shanghai, you become a part of that network, and you could probably pretty easily bounce some questions off those guys and say, hey, I'm looking for some legal rep, or I'm looking for some investors. How's your network, or whatever the case may be, or even the other teams within that accelerator. Has that they came on board in 2013, is that right?
Yes, last year.
How has that impacted your business?
I mean, we always kind of, in my mind, pictured to work with some accelerator because it's just such a natural fit. So in 2013, I called Todd, and we discussed, okay, is it possible to ever bring you guys out of Dalian to Shanghai?
And he was thinking, yes, I was been waiting for this phone call.
Yeah.
Get me out of here.
So, but it wasn't that easy in the beginning because those guys, they had their route in Dalian for 3 years. And everything was very good, right? They had their benefits in Dalian, and we want to provide them with a transition period as smoothly as possible. So we get a lot of their opinion when we are designing Lighthouse for what the space could be for China Accelerator when they moving in. Right. So it's good. There's no surprising when those folks coming in. Right. And when they come in, I think one of the best benefits is we also have a lot of investors coming in to visit our teams based in our locations. Yeah. Right? So it's almost every time when the investors come in, their first stop at China Accelerator because they're at the doorway, right? Yeah. And we can get those teams being introduced in Accelerator program and tell them what they're doing. Tell the investors, right? Yeah, and get their beneficial. And I think you also see on the demo day. There is actually a very good amount of crowd of investors inside of the space.
It's
win-win.
Yeah, it seems like a good fit for both of you.
For sure.
And I think it's a good fit for China Accelerator to be in Shanghai. It just seems like a more natural place. But how many teams, like as in startup companies, and then how many people currently work under the People Squared banner?
Okay. We have roughly 90 teams at the moment in the different 5 locations. Wow. And this number will increase as we finish up the renovation for Hero Center, which is the
hackerspace.
The hackerspace.
What's the turnover rate for teams in the co-working space?
It's normally it's naturally a 70-30%, where 30% of the team they just use us like for monthly users, and those are mostly the teams who are using the open space. So ever since our second space from Lighthouse, we started to have some closed individual offices, right? So a lot of the teams who are using our individual offices, they are long term, mostly signing up for a year.
Okay, so and then in terms of how long the average tenant stays, is it a year? Is it 2 years?
Yeah,
what's it like?
You know what's interesting? 1 year is the magic number.
Really?
Normally, after a year, you see either team grow
or fail.
Yeah. So there are normally 2 ways to get out of People Squared. One is you lie down and someone will get you out,
right?
Or you just raise your head and you get a very good success.
Regardless, they make it or they don't make it, they can leave anyway.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And so Lighthouse was your third space, right?
Yes.
In 2013, and now you're just about to open Hero, then that's your 5th space?
Yes.
So in not very many months, you've opened up 2 new spaces. I mean, is this just a result of demand you've been receiving?
Yeah.
Or what you expect to be the demand in the next year or so.
And 2014 was a really special year for us because we realized not only the demand from the teams, but also the demand from other spaces that were thinking of doing similar things to open up for startup or to open up to receive more interesting teams, right? And we realized we had a lot of things learned from the past 2 years, and which we don't want to see those spaces to fail again on all the mistakes that we have been made, right? So in early 2014, we released a new product called People Squared Service, which we provide our space service to other spaces like us. And we help them to do space planning. We help them to do space renovation. We help them to do management and also output for our software and hardware.
Right.
So
you're not trying to, compete or keep out other co-working spaces. You're trying to sell shovels to gold miners, basically. So give them the infrastructure and services they need to open those.
For sure, yeah. We realize if we're the only one who's doing co-working space in China, that's not a healthy ecosystem, right? And it's actually basically impossible for us to take all the spaces. And if there are people who want to do that, we will love to provide our help just to help them get started.
Are there many other? I suspect People Squared is the biggest co-working space, right? With the most seats, the most desks, the most locations. Are there many other co-working spaces in Shanghai? And if so, do they offer something similar, or are they more in their infancy than People Squared?
Sometimes it's very vague. Sometimes business centers, they also provide a little bit co-working, right?
Right.
But I think it's the community defines what a space is. And I think without those fantastic teams, we're just a space, right? Sure. So I think, but building up a community is not a one day's work, right? Sometimes it takes a lot of time, 3 years, right?
I remember that, back there, 2013, right? You guys have events pretty much every weekend.
Yes.
So a lot of events are free, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
So every time I go there, I see a lot of crowds. So that's actually sort of helped build up the community and the reputation. So I think that helps to sort of explain the popularity of your People Square brand.
Yeah. So it's interesting that you mentioned events.
Right.
I also curate Shanghai Startup Digest since 2011. And when we started, we realized a lot of the Shanghai event organizer, they were struggling for event venues, right? It's either too far away, or sometimes it's not big enough, or maybe it's too expensive. So what we decided to do is if the event match 3 requirements, first it has to be startup, design, or tech related. Second, it's a non-commercial event. Yeah. And third, it promises it won't charge for its attendance. And we will provide our venues to the teams for free, and we're still doing that.
That's great.
Yeah, through every of the People Square co-working space, right? So that actually, I think, helped a lot just with all the local events.
Yeah.
And bring them together.
Because in a place like Shanghai, and Tony's directly involved in this, obviously, and actually Steve, who we had on the last show from China NetCloud, was saying that when he was in Silicon Valley in the late 90s, and early 2000s, there was events everywhere. Like every night there was 50 events, and from every different industry, every different thing, and they were, very well attended. And we were talking about how that's beginning here, and it's necessary to make those connections, to cross-pollinate those ideas and that sort of stuff. But Shanghai is becoming an increasingly expensive place, and it doesn't really have that center where things are going to be going on, even though lots of people are starting to do stuff. So it's great that you offer that to those people that are motivated to bring people together and to share ideas and connect. on certain terms that are certainly reasonable. I mean, that's great. I think the more of that we can have here, the more vibrant the community will be, and the more things that will happen.
Absolutely.
It's awesome. So with is Hero open yet now?
In early October, August.
Early August.
Yeah.
So is there anything, can you tell us a bit about that? Is there anything special you've done with Hero that is not included in other spaces? I'm sure you've made some changes. So what's the big deal with Hero?
So Hero Center is the first space that we're trying to put a theme around, right? Before all the spaces is okay, if you are a tech startup, if you are a freelancer, you could come over.
Right.
For Hero Center, we made a theme around for hardware and makers.
Right.
It's actually not one of our specialty, but in Lighthouse, we had two really, really great teams coming out of Lighthouse who were doing hardware related stuff. They got a lot of attention and eyeballs, and to be honest, hardware has been a very hot topic over the past 1 year, and we just see an increasingly demand and a lot of hardware startups they come out, and we realize a lot of their demands are very similar. For example, one of our team, they often go to Xinchejian just for their 3D printers, right? Yeah. And we don't have one over at any of our spaces. So we decided, okay, why don't we just do something fun with hardware? And we had Beijing has its own hardware hackerspace, right? Shanghai has Xinchejian. But what's more interesting is we decided to do that because it was in a time when Xinchejian need to face the decision of making a move, right? They have to move out their old WK location, and they were looking for a new space. And we said, okay, it's just a perfect timing to do the right thing. And so now Xinchejian is a part of the residency over in Hero, same as Fab Lab.
So the Fab Lab and Xinchejian, the space that they have now is belong to you guys?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay.
So they're residents in our new space.
I see.
Yeah.
That's nice.
Yeah. How big is the new space?
It's about 1,500 square meters.
And how many desks will it have?
We are targeting to host about 30 teams.
30 teams.
Yeah, 30 teams in there.
That's great.
Yeah, and one of the largest team we had in there is about 50 people.
Right.
So,
do you guys, in terms of how you take payment, do you ever take equity positions, or is it just people pay by the month for their desks and that's it?
We try not to take equities.
Right.
Yeah. And that's because we realize.
You try not to, or you don't?
We don't.
Okay.
Yeah, we don't. Because a lot.
I try not to, but I do.
Yeah, but because a lot of teams they come to us and they ask the question, right? So one thing is because we stay with the teams very closely to each other, and once you have a chunk of their equities, your attitude towards that changes. Right.
Sure.
Yeah. And
favoritism and stuff
right.
like that.
Yeah. Sometimes you provide like just friendly advice from your past experience or what do you think the investors would be thinking.
Right.
If you're directly involved with the team, sometimes you work things differently, whether you realize or not.
True.
Right? Might not be fair to other teams.
No,
right?
not at all. Yeah. Right? So that's actually become one good thing. If the team they really need help to get a startup advice, we will recommend them to go to China Accelerator. Right. Because if you really need, that's the right place to go.
Sure. Yeah. And with you, so Beijing is going to be location 6, right?
Yes.
When's that opening up?
It's Beijing is actually location 5 if you just count by the orders. But
okay. Yeah. So it's open already.
It's open already.
And how big is that one?
That is actually a smaller one.
Right.
Yeah. So that one we return to 300 square meters.
Okay.
But the Beijing one is actually also a very interesting case. That space was actually belonged to one of my friend, and she was doing a painting class, but as you could imagine, can be hard. Beijing's rent is very high.
Crazy, yeah.
Yeah. So, and they're in a very good location in Dawanglu, just near the metro, 5 minutes walk. And we went to their space. We just loved it. And she said, could you thinking about anything to help out of our space? Because you are the master for that. I said, I don't know, but I can try. Mm-hmm. So we took a few pictures of the space and sent it out in WeChat. We just sent in for 2 groups. And I got 10, 15 teams replied just in one day.
Wow.
And showed their interest. And we said, okay, why don't we just do that then as our first trial in Beijing? Yeah. So that's why we didn't do any promotion for that space, because in day one, that space was full. And we just we did the same thing. We just output our system in there. Yeah.
I mean, of course, it seems like a natural extension because Beijing is like the tech and startup sort of center in China. Even though I hate to admit that, because in Shanghai, I really feel like we've got the
very good community.
We've got the community. We got the right material, like the right raw material to make a really good startup community. But still, at this point, like the big players and stuff like that are in Beijing, the big universities that produce these people. So it makes sense for you guys to have something up there. And I guess there's a lot of interest. And of those, all the people that express interest, is it similar? 70% local, 30% foreign, or?
Beijing, well, for us, it's interesting. Beijing is almost purely local.
Right.
But when we're doing Beijing, all the problem seems gone in Shanghai comes back, and it just reminds me how important to having a community is important for us, right?
Sure.
So people start to ask the same question because our brand was not aware in Beijing, right?
Sure.
And people start to ask, okay, what do you mean by co-working space? Can we have more privacy?
Right.
All those questions comes back.
Yeah.
So it just make us a bit more a believer of, okay, we really need to start organizing the community.
So is your focus now? You're going to have 6 locations open by the end of August, and seemingly well populated. And then you mentioned the People Squared services.
Yes.
Is that, which are you focusing on moving forward, or is it both, just kind of pushing both of them and seeing what sticks?
I think for us, what's really important is the quality of the service that we're providing. We didn't realize that when we were doing the first 2 spaces, but now since we're in a business, right?
Yeah.
And we just realized, okay, we are basically providing a service to the teams, right?
Yeah.
And it's not only about sharing the rent anymore. Before we had a lot of teams, they come to us, they just had 1 or 2 folks inside the group. Now we had teams who had raised their Series A, Series B coming to us and said, okay, we choose your space because we like the environment. We like the community, and even though we are growing, we would like to stay close with the startup teams to get our mind sharp. So that keeps us to putting more focus just on what we should be doing.
Right. That actually reminds me, a book I read, author mentioned that now there are 2 types of sort of format. One is creator, the other one is server. So creative is, startup companies and, they created things. But you guys are server, as a, party serve others.
Yes. So, yeah. So what we always mentioned, doing a startup nowadays in China is becoming more and more popular and simple.
Yeah.
We had cloud services in China now, right? And we had logistics service. Now, when you're doing a startup, you really just need to focus on the core things, which is the product.
Right.
And now we are doing space as a service, and we really want to do that well and taking the offline part,
right?
Taking those burdens away from the startups.
At the end of the day, what you do, I mean, when you began it, you were a startup as well.
Yes.
I mean, not a tech startup, but in the tech industry, obviously. So basically main difference there being scalability and the speed with which you can do so. But I'm just wondering, you're surrounded by these other startups, these tech companies on a daily basis, and generally the consensus or the perception of tech startups is that they're young, they're energetic, they're ambitious, they're hardworking, they're emotional, up and down, but they're very try to stay positive, and they're doing everything they can to make their business or their project a success. How much has that mentality, being in that atmosphere, rubbed off on you as an entrepreneur and a business owner, and like maybe inspired you, or maybe kept you going when things were a little bit annoying or tough?
Yes. So it's interesting, when we started first space, which was my own. Mm-hmm. We think we were helping the startups, right? We think, okay, we had some. Myself, I had some experience on doing startups. Mm-hmm. Some of them are success, or some of them are failures, and we just share the experience. And now we're seeing more and more teams. Actually, those teams giving us a lot of insights. Yeah. There's thousands of ways, different ways you can be successful, mm-hmm. but there's always that many ways you fail a startup. Yeah. And we just hope from our observation we can just bring those insights to the teams and make them know.
It must be really interesting, too, because through your work you get exposure to so many different things, and not in just the projects that people in your co-working space are working on, but these people that are entrepreneurs and startup people, they're always interested in somewhat unusual, they're interested in the latest gadgets, latest mm-hmm. services, all this kind of stuff, and you get kind of exposure to that. I mean, for me, someone who's interested in all that, it would be great. I know you have a lot of work to do as well, and it's not easy. But just being in that environment where every day you go in and be like, oh, I didn't hear about that. That's cool. That's cool. That's cool. Is that kind of what it's like?
It's sometimes very mind blowing. Right. We had sometimes people from traditional kind of industry, mm-hmm. For example, hotel business. They come to our space. And we show them some of the technologies that teams were doing. For example, wireless charging. Put your cell phone on the table and it can start charging. And those things they were just hearing from like a far, far away storybook or something. Right. Yeah, they were just starting to ask the question, okay, when can we have that have that as a service, as a product to merge to their hotel business. Right. So in that sense, the teams they also get their first batch of customers. Right. Like those are normally the most important things.
Is it difficult? And this kind of backtracks a bit to what I asked you earlier about taking equity. But I feel like in the position you guys are in, and with all that energy and all that ambition and hope in all the teams that you're hosting, is it difficult to stay focused on your core service and what you want to provide and what makes you successful versus saying we could do this for the teams, or we could do that, and we could help promote them, and we could help sell their products, and we could, is that balancing act challenging?
Always, yeah. I feel normally, I guess it's not just for us, but many times for teams are in this stage when you already grown. Before you were begging for opportunities. Mm-hmm. Now you are just seeing too many opportunities waving at you, saying hi. Right. And the hardest time is to turn off for opportunities that you don't know whether it's going to be good or not. Yeah. For us, this comes all the time. Mm-hmm. And we try to listen very closely to the teams. When we have ideas, because your client, which is our teams, right? They're always beside you. Sure. So it's a good advantage for us. Yeah. Okay. Do you think this is valuable to do? Right? Yeah. Or for us to do some very small test, we just make that very quickly, some quick prototype, and show them the thing.
Well, that's the thing. You have access to this really insightful client base and market. again, going back to it, must be sometimes, even though you can bounce stuff off of them, must be tricky sometimes not to be like, oh, well, why don't we just go down that road a bit and see where it leads, rather than, understanding and focusing and knowing what your main core deliverable is going to be, and just providing that at a very high level.
Yes, yeah. I guess it's the same as Lean Startup for everything, right? We're also trying to do MVP, pivoting.
Sure,
right? Yeah,
sure. Another one of the things that just popped into my mind that I'd be interested in hearing about is, obviously, I mean, the whole startup ecosystem is incredibly interesting to a lot of people, especially younger generation, people that don't want the regular 9 to 5. People are looking for a little more stimulation intellectually, emotionally, all that kind of stuff. But in that, and the people that actually take the leap and do it, usually they're fairly unique people. They're willing to throw away the safety net, leave the job, leave the family, leave the nest, and just go for a long shot. And we've discussed on the show before, and we were discussing in depth with Todd, going down the startup path is a tumultuous and it's wrought with danger, because there is a very, very slim chance that it's going to be a quote-unquote success at the end of the tunnel, just statistically speaking.
For sure.
Forgetting, of course, that you learn a lot along the way and the connections you make, and maybe you try 1, 2, 3, and the fourth time you hit it. Let's forget that for a second. Just the personality it takes to be like, fuck it, I'm going for it, and you go and do it. I'm just thinking, when you have 50 of those people in one room all the time, what kind of, and all the different personality, emotional attributes that comes with that, what kind of environment are you working in most of the time?
Yeah, it's actually very interesting. I guess because we're doing this in China, the local Chinese and Westerners, they have a very different cultural background.
Right.
What we discovered from the very beginning is the local teams, by natural, freestyle communication is not their way to do things. Right. It not often requires a lot of organizing involved to put those founders together, and otherwise, like you will see, those people will be just like working in a Starbucks, where everybody is just doing their work, and but not talking to each other. So that's why we kind of invented this thing called Lunch and Learn, where we know all the founders are busy, especially for some of the bigger teams. And we just provide this time slot in every Thursday, which we invite all the people inside the space and just bring their lunch. And we give one person in the team. It can be the founder or can be the intern. They comes up and introduce a little bit about themselves, so that people know what you are doing, what's your personality. And also there are sessions for teams to raise up for their concerns, the problems that they're facing. Yeah. So and once you start to bring the community together, we just realize, like, if you don't know the person's name, you don't know what that person is doing. There's never a thing called collaboration. So once we did that, and it gets much better. So the teams, they know each other, they feel comfortable, and they start to talk offline.
So basically, it's kind of like using icebreaker sort of stuff to bring down the barriers to communication and help them communicate and collaborate more. And this is actually something we were discussing with Steve Mushero of China NetCloud on an earlier podcast. And he worked as the CTO for Tudo from 2005 to 2007. And Tudo was already a massive company and lots of employees, and one of the early successful Chinese startup ventures that was not backed by one of the big companies. It wasn't just one of their properties. But he was saying, and I'm sure you're aware of this, and Tony and I actually discussed this a few weeks ago, the cultural differences. Because I asked him, what was it like being in a startup company in China versus Silicon Valley? And not surprisingly, he said, well, there's innovation and all that kind of stuff, but in Silicon Valley, it was like not so much a top-down approach. It was everyone was kind of thinking, innovating, going back and forth. What do you think of this? What do you think of that? Whereas in his experience in Tudo there was the Laoban and everybody else.
That's right.
And the word came from the Laoban. This is what I want you to be thinking about and working on. And everyone else was kind of, they're certainly talented, but more just head down, do the work that I was told to do. And I think, I'm not going to knock it. Tudo's done incredibly well. So there's certainly something to that technique and style of management. But I don't think anyone would argue that a more collaborative approach leads to greater complexity and innovation.
Definitely.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's great that you're helping especially your local tenants break down those sort of cultural conventions and break down those barriers to communication and help with the collaboration, which hopefully will lead to innovation, more success, better understanding between teams.
Exactly.
I mean,
if they don't collaborate with each other, what's the good to come to the co-working space? Why don't you just work on your separate place silo?
Right. Absolutely, yeah. So we have actually specifically made rules when the teams they're doing their lease, right? Mm-hmm. They have to be doing certain things, right? Mm-hmm. If participating in lunch and learn is actually one of the things we're listed in our terms.
Really?
So, some team they ask what the heck is lunch and learn, and we have to just explain to them.
Right.
That's very good. I remember Tony Hsieh from Zappos. I watched this interview. Once he said he do everything can to sort of encourage collaboration. One thing they said is very interesting. They said that when employees get off work in their building, there's 2 exits. In order for them to create any chance to talk to each other, they close one exit.
Mm-hmm, yeah,
it's amazing, isn't it?
That's actually seeing when we were helping other spaces. There's one very specific stage we call space planning. Is we realize to help have a good community, the space. The set out of the space actually will help a lot if you do things right.
Sure. Just facilitating communication and interaction.
For sure, yeah. For example, in our Yanping attic, we have ordered water stations in just downstairs.
Water cooler, yeah.
Yeah, where everybody, if they need to use fridge, they need to come down from the second floor. Come down and where to use water, to use washroom. And we put all the entertainment, like the PlayStation, television, or on the second floor, so that people who want to play video games, they need to go to the second floor.
Yeah. I find it really interesting that you, going back again a bit, that you incorporate the lunch and learn into the lease agreement or the partnership agreement or whatever, because it really it shows how much you value and you recognize the importance of the collaborative and communicative necessity in a co-working space, and you include it in there because it's part of your brand. It's part of your product. And basically, in doing that, you're making sure that your tenants strengthen your product, or at least uphold the values and fundamentals of your product and service, rather than diminish it in some way if they don't want to interact with other people.
For sure,
it's very interesting.
Yeah, it's as you mentioned, like for Tudo, they have certain rules as a top-down approach. Like every company or have their rules to help the company operate.
Yeah.
So we find if we make a rule, it's not to having people work more productive or anything. Right? It's helping them to be able to plug into the space and get the benefit of it.
Yeah. And being that you mentioned, there's under all of your different locations, there's lots of different startups, lots of different industries, and actually maybe we can touch on that in a second. But a lot of the people that will listen to this podcast are potential entrepreneurs or people in the startup community that maybe are thinking about getting involved in the startup. You get exposure to so many at various stages in their life cycle. Do you glean any data from the startups that you observe, and can you see okay, so I'm not too surprised they failed because X, or I can tell they're going to succeed because X. Do you get a sense for those sort of things?
It's actually it's interesting. We were just talking about that.
You don't have to name names, of course.
No. But we were actually talking to some of the CEOs or founders inside our space about this idea. because now we have our own hardware for people to swap their members card, right? We at one point we have the ability to track the number of times that people are spending inside a space, right? So I was just joking around with the founders. I said, okay, do you want to know your employees or team status?
Right.
How many?
Who puts in the most hours?
Yeah, they were kind of interested.
Yeah.
They were kind of interested to know that.
This could be a value-added service.
Yeah, but imagine, of course, those were all jokes. But imagine later on, if an investor come to us and ask of us to do a DD, and we just provide the investors with those data. Okay, this team, they stayed in this office for that much, and so that we can prove something.
Which would especially be valuable after you have a track record. So not only have you collected the data, but you can see the results of some. You're like, well, actually, as surprising as it is, the people with the lowest attendance actually have the highest correlation with success.
Yeah,
so,
you never know, right? Yeah.
But I mean, in terms of non-hard data,
right.
Like you're there every day, you're seeing the dynamic between founders and how emotional people are getting, the ups and downs in betweens. Can you, and having seen over the last couple of years, people fail, people succeed, can you walk around and be like, that one's probably going to be all right, or they might not make it? Do you get a sense for that, or is it too random?
It's 80% of the time.
Oh, really?
You can feel something.
Yeah.
Founders who will be very likely to be successful are the founders who open their heart, and they know to stay close with their client. They can listen
with the what?
Their client, their
User
customers.
client.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, people who can open to their heart to ideas.
Right.
People who can feel the trend. This is very rare. A lot of people, they just follow the trend. Mm-hmm. But some of the founders, they can feel the trend.
Right.
And sometimes we just think differently as a thing, as we say it.
Yeah.
But we sometimes really see people.
Go ahead. You think that the founder who sort of like more user oriented, there's more likelihood they can be successful. Is that what you mean, right?
Yeah. Well, when doing startups, even if this is your second time or third time doing a startup, it can be all different. So every time you face some different situation, right? And being a CEO, you're dealing thousands of different information every day. Mm-hmm. Product is definitely one of your most important thing, right? Mm-hmm. But that's not everything.
Yeah.
A lot of time, it also depends on your skills to approach to the investors. Because once you have funds, that can bring you advantage to your competitors. Mm-hmm. And there's always skills involved. Yeah. It's not just being honest, but it's a skill of pitching, of telling the best part, of telling your vision. So having a vision of how the product will be is also very important.
Right.
Yeah.
And, I mean, in terms of practical advice you can give to people that are maybe thinking about going to a co-working space like yours. I mean, what I'm trying to say is you'll walk around and you'll be like, oh, well, that founder's dating that founder. That's not going to work because that's a recipe for disaster. Or there's too many tech guys in this one. There's no business guys. That's not going to work. Oh, that one has a nice balance of everything. You know what I'm saying? Like, Is there any ones that you walk by or that you interact with? You're like, this one has X components and they probably got a good shot. This one, because it's not your job to go around and say, listen, maybe you shouldn't date your founder. No. So they use your space. You try to be supportive, but you don't give them advice. So the times that you walk around and observe that are good and that you think people are on the right track versus people are on the wrong track, for our listeners, can you give us a couple examples of each?
Yeah. Well, I think two most important things. One is knowing yourself. Uh-huh. The second thing is being hungry for resources. Those are the two most important things if you come to a co-working space.
And when you say know yourself, I mean, that's historically been said by wise sages throughout the years. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so, when you do a startup, or a lot of people come to our space, they just came out from their 5-year work experience. And they had new ideas, or they see something, right? But often it's 99% of the time when you start doing your startup, you're always short of something. And also meanwhile, you have a very strong advantage. Otherwise, why are you doing a startup, right? So by saying know yourself, that means you need to know both.
Right. So know your motivations, know what you're capable of, know yourself inside and out, because you're probably going to be tested pretty hard throughout the process, right?
Yeah,
so if you don't have a good idea of who you are and what you're capable of at the beginning, maybe you might drop out.
That's right.
Yeah.
So I always say 100 teams doing the same product, you will have 100 different products.
Right.
They will be never in the same form.
Yeah.
And most of the time it's because of the founder's DNA, right? And you need to understand what your DNA is. What product can you make to make it outstanding from the others, or make it be different, right? Sometimes you don't have to be outstanding; you just have to be different.
Yeah.
And to catch your niche customer line, and starting from there, and also that comes to saying why you need to stay hungry for what you are short of for resources, right?
Yeah.
Only when you know what you need, then you will have the motivation, or you will have the direction,
right,
to see, okay, this is the things we have, right? So we have 90 teams now inside People Squared. They all kind of doing different sort of things. Are they actually providing something that you need, right? And now we often, before we had teams who couldn't last, and they just they have to diminish from the space. But actually they never. All of their team members, they get absorbed to other teams.
Right.
Sometimes even the founders.
Yeah.
Right. So whether you are being sensitive,
people get recycled,
Yes.
and they can build on their experiences, and like, okay, this one dissolved, but this one these 4 need more people, and they just suck them in.
Yeah. So it's normally that's why you need to kind of to know the people inside the space,
Sure.
not only the founders, but also the teams, right? Yeah.
Is it? I don't think, unless you're like yourself and you have a bird's eye view, or you're someone who's actually doing it, can you probably appreciate the emotional roller coaster, the angst, the stress of decision making, the timelines in a startup? First of all, I presume there's no in-house therapist at People Squared at the moment, but what kind of, when you look around, because it sounds easier, people get funding, you hear news about funding rounds and all this kind of stuff, and people say, well, this was the idea, we made it, and then people liked it. But the reality is because you talk about knowing yourself and having that certainty of yourself is one thing, but maintaining that self-certitude is another thing, especially when on a daily basis you're confronted with, well, should we go that way or should we go that way? Should we zig or should we zag? Because you can't do both. You don't have the resources. You don't have the time. The implications of a mistake are fairly large sometimes. So I'm just wondering, like, in the environment you work in that you've created, what's the emotional dynamic going on there?
You know what? It's always a very hard question to answer. Every founder probably have all different opinion, and I would say that's probably why a lot of times when an incubator or a VC firm try to incubate their invested teams, they fail. Because they have a very strong opinion. They think they have oversee on the market, right? And they think this is the trend. This is what my team getting invested should do.
Yeah.
But it's normally what you see is not what the founders are thinking.
Yeah.
It's probably not that the founder is being capable or maybe the time is not right. Right?
It's also, I guess, existing in the atmosphere of you are also at the whim of circumstance and luck, right?
Yeah.
As we were discussing before on the podcast, maybe you're developing a taxi app, but then boom, Didi Dachu gets launched and you're done.
Yeah.
So knowing that any day your dream could just be ripped out of your chest and you'll have to start all over again. I mean, it's tough.
That's why it's the beauty. They are the founders. Right?
Yeah.
We can't tell them what to do, but we tell them what we observe, and they make the decisions.
Yeah.
Every founder inside our space, they are the captain, right? And so if we're doing the things for them, or we're deciding what to do, like what's the fun of doing a startup?
Right. Yeah. And what are some of the biggest challenges that startups that come through your door that work at your space face here? Doesn't matter what it is, but what you notice, and maybe they come to you, maybe they go to China Accelerator for advice. But what are some of the things that usually stick out? Like most of the people that come through your door are going to have to encounter, and that they have a challenge with.
Yeah, a lot of times, the first thing people will ask is, okay, I need money, but 99% of the time they didn't realize is they need something behind money. What they need is what money can reach them for. Right. Sometimes it's not being reached by money.
Right.
It's for example to get good people. Right. That's mostly it's a frequent asked question. Right. But many times it's not about how much I can hire, because you are a startup team. How much money you can pay when you are competing with Tencent or Alibaba, right? It's your founder's personality.
You have to appeal to people with other things, right?
Yeah, it's your character, right? Yeah. Whether you can talk people through to get the best people. Some of the best things actually in world they're free, or they are not measured by money, right?
Sure.
Yeah. So that's something, again, comes back to your DNA. Like, what's your DNA? That attracts what people you will get.
Are there many conflicts or challenges between teams within your spaces? Like, is that something that you have to deal with regularly, or are most people on the same page?
We what we do as one of our team recruiting process is we do an interview with each team. So that we know what they do, and when we get teams, they need to match two criteria. First, founder need to be openly minded. The second part is they can't compete with some within a space.
Right.
If they do compete, we let them introduce the founders, let them talk to each other, let them know each other. And
see if they can join forces or something.
There we go. Yeah. Then we put the teams together.
Yeah.
If not, now it's better because we have multiple spaces. We just try to avoid that.
Right. Oh, okay. So no competition within a physical location.
Yes.
But I can be at People Squared, and someone can be at Hero, and we could both be doing something similar.
Yeah. For example, we have multiple medical-related startups. Right.
Cool.
Yeah.
And is there any trends you're seeing among all the teams, like hot areas? You mentioned hardware for Hero. I mean, you must have identified that as being a hot, something that's going to be increasingly popular.
Yeah.
Among the existing teams, is there anything else that's sticking out in terms of popularity? Or
it's interesting. In Shanghai, there's normally just a couple of industries people want to stick their head in. One is lifestyle-related industrial, like food. Restaurant, rating, those kind of things.
Yeah.
And plus, Dianping is in Shanghai, right? Gaming is normally mobile gaming is another industry.
Yeah.
But we find teams in Beijing they're opening for more variety of flavors of industries.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. And what about Shanghai do you think is conducive to the startup scene? Like what we were saying earlier, kind of joking, like hopefully it'll be Shanghai will be the center of tech and startup in China at some point. What attributes of this city do you think make it like a fertile place for potential companies and startups and stuff like that?
Yeah.
If anything.
Yeah, I find the Shanghai community is actually very welcoming. If you you're new to the city or you're new to the business, if you find the right community, if you find the right people, they will always introduce you around to get you started more quickly or easily.
Right.
And once you find one node, and it connects you to a lot more.
I guess the benefit of having a small community still is that the connections are made that much faster, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if it was a really big community, it would take a little longer to meet all different people. But I mean, here, because of its size, you can get started. You go to a few drink events with Tony. You can go to a few free events at People Squared, and Bob's your uncle. You know a lot of the people, right? So I guess that's one of the benefits currently going on in the scene. Have there been any big? I know this is not necessarily part of your business, but just out of curiosity, have there been any big exits or acquisitions, or any companies that have come through your space that have really hit a stride, become popular, become profitable, anything like that?
Yeah, we had a couple, but normally we don't take the credit for that.
No,
because,
of course, of course.
Because the founders they work really hard.
Yeah. I'm just wondering, could you name any of the companies that came through?
For sure, yeah. Actually, like I mentioned in the beginning of the show, Uptake is one of our first team, and they acquired by Groupon in 2011.
For how much?
For millions US.
Wow,
yeah.
Great.
So they did really well. And we had Kan Chu Fang, which when the team came to us, they only had 2 people.
Right.
And they just raised their second round of funding.
Which company was that?
A medical company, Kan Chu Fang.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and they do mobile medical, and allow you to upload your prescription to a mobile phone and compare the data, tells you what treatment other people are getting.
Great.
Yeah.
I mean, it's still, given the age of People Squared, probably over the next 2 or 3 years, you'll probably end up seeing more companies have liquidity events, right? Because the general life cycle of a startup from start to either being acquired or IPO or something like that's apparently about 7 years. So maybe you'll start seeing that more over the coming years. But it's exciting to note that of course everybody can't succeed, but companies that are coming through are gaining some traction. Some interesting things are happening. It's working basically.
For sure.
The model is working.
Definitely.
I want to switch it up a bit. I'm always interested with the things that different people do to perform better in their lives. And I've talked about this a bit with Tony in terms of diet and exercise and stuff like that, but there's many different things people can do. Now, you may not be doing anything. I meet a lot of entrepreneurs that disregard their body and their performance and their whatever because they have to go all their focus and attentions on what they're doing. But is there any rituals, routines, anything that you do in terms of what you consume intellectually, what you do with your body, whatever it might be, that helps you perform better, keeps you on track, keeps you focused, and keeps you pushing this business that you've started for yourself forward?
Yeah. I think as many of the entrepreneurs or startups, they do similar things. They dream a lot. Either it's not dreaming or daydreaming. And they social. And for me, particularly, I think a lot when I walk and when I cycle. Sometimes when you do startups, you're actually being pushed for a lot of things, right? It's not your own decision. It's just a lot of things are coming. You need to make a quick decision, just flip on your mind. But from time to time, you need to kind of stop and look back and say, okay, those are the things I have by today, right? And then what? What's the next step?
So there's less about routine, more about being flexible on the spot, right? It's like combat zone. You're always on the combat zone.
Yeah. Well, in a startup life, everything is very dynamic, right?
Right.
But you need to find the routine out of those dynamic things. You need to find okay, what's the best way can make my model be able to copy right? Make my model be able to scale, right? Yeah, and out of those chaoses, if you can find your secret, then you can be successful.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
What kind of, a lot of people in this industry, a large portion of your time, or at least you have to give some consideration to filling up your head with useful information. You have to read books about legal issues surrounding startups and tech this, and you have to follow some publications and online journals and stuff like that. What, if any, podcasts, books, whatever, have you found, inspirational or informative that you use to, go about your business?
Yeah, I always say, Google is my friend. I find it's just at this stage of the day, you have to deal with 100 things a day.
Yeah.
Normally, when you get home, you're exhausted. You try to utilize all your pieces, right? Maybe before the days of WeChat, we also have some quiet time in the toilet.
Right.
But now, when you have WeChat, your office is on your hand.
Always online.
Yeah. So, right, you always communicate to teams, to the people. So that bites every bit of your time.
Right.
So now I find the best way to learn a knowledge is from when you need it. And just search on Wiki, search on Google.
Efficient,
yeah. Talk to people, get the exact piece of information you need.
Right.
Yeah.
Just-in-time strategy.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, People Squared has been growing a lot recently. Shanghai is a very busy city, hustle and bustle, never sleep sort of place. Do you do anything to, unplug, recharge the batteries a bit? Do you go anywhere special? Do you meditate? Do you do any of that sort of stuff, or do you just grind it out right now?
Yeah, well, if you add my WeChat, I have a line on there that says, "Work hard, play harder," and I find it's extremely true in this city when you work really hard to earn what you have,
right.
And you really need to free up your mind. And
so what does that mean for you? How do you play harder?
Sometimes it's not so exciting, but just gather your friends and sometimes play board game or.
Right.
But sometimes, we don't do that much these days. But we used to play even through the whole night, just with cards or go to karaoke with the teams.
Right. So get together with friends and not think about all the stuff that's going to come down Monday or
for sure, yeah. When you're playing, you just forget about everything.
Yeah.
Even when you're playing with investors, you have 1,000 things you want to pitch for them, dump those things off.
Yeah. So where do you see People Squared in the next, I want to say 5 years, but so much has been going on in the last couple of years. What position, what's your vision for People Squared over the next 5 years?
Yeah. It's hard to say because for startups it's really you care more about the next day thing, right?
Yeah.
But if I have to say that, I would kind of hope when they're thinking out of having an office space, right now they're thinking of a technical park, maybe rent out from a residential house, and those are actually not. They're their
strength.
We often had teams coming to us from a residential house, and they said, "Okay, we have been there for a year, and it's just four of us staring at each other every day."
Right.
And we had interns, teams, new hiring coming to us, and we are doing great stuff, but they didn't realize it because of our settings for the space, right? So we hope that People Squared can be an answer just for new businesses, new startups. Yeah, if they need to find a place, this is the first name or brand they can thinking of.
Right.
Go-to place for startup.
Yes, yeah.
And where do you see, and as an extension of that or related, where do you see the Shanghai startup scene in 5 years? You get to see how many people are submitting applications trying to work at your space. How does the scene look for you in 5 years?
It's a bit hard to say just in Shanghai because nowadays everything is connected. But I would say for China, we have seen a great improvement of the startup scene. I was doing a bit talk in Microsoft 2 years ago, and we said no acquisition happening in China. but look back in the two years, right?
Yeah.
Ali, Tencent, Baidu, they're all doing crazy.
Things just happen so fast. It's almost a silly thing to try to predict because everything changes so fast.
Yeah, but I would say the ecosystem, the big ecosystem is getting better and better.
Mm-hmm.
Now, because of those acquisitions, we see more serial entrepreneurs. They coming out of the old business,
Right.
or they become angel investors.
Yeah.
Right? And that will just make the ecosystem a bit better every day. And I think what we're experiencing is basically what's happening 5 years ago, or maybe 10 years ago in Silicon Valley or in Europe.
Yeah.
Right? Basically the same thing, but the local startups they will be maybe focusing a bit more domestically.
Sure.
Just on that,
Yeah.
but playing its own ecosystem.
Right. Cool. Now I want to do something, if it's okay with you.
Yeah.
I want to do a bit of word association, right? So I'm going to say a word, and I want you to give me like a 1 or 2 word answer, all right? Not too many. Anything, whatever comes to your mind.
Okay.
You ready?
Okay.
All right. So Mark Zuckerberg.
Steve Jobs.
Okay. Jack Ma.
Ma Huateng.
That's his name, right?
No, that's from Tencent.
Oh, that's
Xiao Ma Ge from Tencent.
okay. Obama.
Michelle.
Okay. Wealth.
Healthy.
Politics.
Ruling.
Ruling. WeChat.
All the time.
Shanghai.
Home.
People Squared.
Startups.
Future.
Bright.
Nice. I like it. So last question before we close this out. Everyone that comes on the show, I ask them to give 3 pieces of advice to people that might be listening that are anywhere in the world that are thinking that might be in a job or that are looking at getting involved in the startup or tech scene, but particularly planning and thinking about coming here to China or are already here and want to get involved in something. You have so much insight on this. You've seen so many startups come through your doors, failures, successes, ups and downs. What are 3 pieces of advice that you could give to the people listening to help them on their way?
Okay. I think myself, I pretty much experienced the same thing. Having been away for 8 years and coming back to Shanghai, it's almost a new city for me. And it's sometimes really important to know your advantage. And before you ever thinking of something to do, because otherwise you will be just spending a bit more time. Not saying impossible, right? But it will be harder to get yourself started. So always start with something you're a bit familiar with.
Play to your strengths.
Yeah. And always find a good friend or someone who can help you, because doing a startup is very lonely.
Right.
Find someone, find a company who can go through this with you.
Right.
Or sometimes you don't even to get him as your co-founder,
Right.
but just to get him as some piece of advice from. Right? Yeah.
And third piece?
And third piece is always follow your heart, and you will get a lot of advice in the later on stage.
Good advice. Not too dissimilar from Tony's last piece of advice when he was on the show, and he said, be bold, which I thought was great because, if you don't have that attitude of boldness and gusto and can do, then you're not going to shoot for the stars and you don't have any chance of reaching them.
Right.
Thank you very much for coming on the show today,
John.
Bob. And Tony, any other questions for Bob from you? Or
No, I just want to add one thing because recently I heard news from Yahoo.
Yeah.
They used to doing Soho, so some employees can choose to work at home office, right? Now they have new sort of corporation policy. They ask the employees to work in the corporation.
Yeah.
So you can see there's a trend because they realize the value when people work together. There is something some people call adjacent opportunity. So when people work there, they can create more opportunity than when they're separated.
Yeah.
So I can see with that trend, I can see there's a pricing future for co-working spaces, Shanghai and China, and People Squared, of course.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but that's kind of the guiding principle of People Squared, in that two people together are greater than the sum of their parts, right?
Great,
it's more than just 1 + 1.
Yes.
It's more than it's squared, actually.
Yeah, exactly. It's that intangible that arises from two things together.
Yes. That's right.
So, guys, thank you very much for coming on the show today. Bob, where can people, if they want to apply for the space, if they want to get in touch with you, what's the best place to do it? Your website or your email or something like that?
Oh, for sure. We have a channel on our website homepage. So people can apply for spaces and get our helps.
And that's peoplesquared.com.cn?
People/squared.com.
People/squared.com.
Yeah.
And Tony, what kind of things are you up to, and where can people get in touch? Are we doing the next drink about next month?
The first Thursday of month. So.
First what?
First Thursday
of every month. And where can they learn about it? Website?
You can go to website Shanghai Startup drinkentrepreneur.com.
ShanghaiDrinkEntrepreneur.com.
Yeah.
Cool. And of course, we are Tech in Shanghai. You can get us up on iTunes. Search Tech in Shanghai. On Twitter @Tech in Shanghai, and techinshanghai.com. The website's live with all the other episodes that we've done. Thanks very much, guys. Take care.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Tech in Shanghai podcast. If you enjoyed the show, subscribe to us on iTunes and follow us on Twitter @Tech in Shanghai for everything tech from Shanghai and China. See you next time.